was that the capability of our teams and nurture them. So it isn't enough just to declare a team self-organizing. We tend to do a lot with agile teams. No, you're self-organizing now.
And through that work, and together with Matthew Skelton, we came to write the book, Team Topologies, which is available on all the retailers. So it's published by T-Revolution Press, who also published the DevOps Handbook, Phoenix Project, the Unicorn Project, if you're familiar with those. But so I'll get straight to what is Conway's Law. So it's actually defined by Mel Conway, who has had a very fruitful career in software development, but he's a thinker about organizations and how that relates to software. So he's saying in this paper he published that any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. In other words, if the design of the system that we're trying to deliver and the team structures and communication structure are very different, what is going to emerge in the end is the team and communication structures, okay? So this became known as Conway's Law. And when we look at this, particularly in applied to software delivery, we can think about some ways in which this plays a role. So imagine we have an organization that is our software delivery structure like this, where most teams have kind of those two pizza teams have perhaps have front-end, back-end capabilities. So they're able to develop both the back-end systems as well as the user interfaces and things like this. But then you have centralized DBA, centralized ops functions. By understanding Conway's Law, what we will expect, and that's what we've seen in many organizations, is that the kind of systems, the products that come out of this are going to look a little bit like this, where you almost like turn 90 degrees, and you see that what comes out in the end, regardless of what was the intent for this product, for this delivery, is going to mirror more or less the team organization. So we're going to tend to have kind of a shared or some shared central databases that multiple teams depend on, and that's going to cause probably some bottlenecks in how we can deliver faster. And the same for operational. If we have a dedicated ops team, then probably we're going to be slower to respond to issues and to especially any non-trivial issues and problems we might have with our services and products. It's going to take more time to diagnose, to find out which team actually has to fix it. And so we'll be slower to respond to problems, to respond to customer needs and requests. So obviously this is a simplistic view, but this, just to give you an idea, this is what tends to happen and what we've seen and what we've, not only in our own consulting, but also talking with other organizations, that there's this kind of mirroring effect between the team structures here and what comes out in the end in our products and our services. So once we understand that, once we acknowledge that, we can apply what people call the reverse Conway maneuver, which is saying, okay, let's try to align the two things so that we're not fighting against our own team structures, organization design. We want that to help us go faster and not kind of be an obstacle to whatever kind of product and architecture we're trying to achieve. So if we start the other way around, if we want to have some kind of microservice architecture, so the technicalities don't matter too much, but in general, I'm sure all of you are familiar that if we have more decoupled systems and services, then each team responsible for a service will be able to make changes and evolve that service more independently and therefore faster with less dependencies on other teams. So that's kind of the good thing we want to achieve, decoupling in our system design, in our services, as much as we can. And so if we want that, in general, is a good thing, then we should aim at organizing our teams in the same way. We should aim at understanding what do teams need.
Manuel, you're breaking up a little bit. Can you turn your video off just so we just see the slides? Is that possible? So we can get a bit more bandwidth juice for you.
I think it was a temporary network problem here. Like you said, John, struggling with fighting for bandwidth. Here we go. Can you see my slides again?
Yeah, we got you back.
Okay.
Great stuff.
Hopefully it won't happen again. So as I was saying, if you look at this, this influence of the organization design structures in the systems that we provide, and therefore the kind of the ability to evolve them and change them faster than if we have human resources or senior management deciding on organization design and team structures without this awareness of Conway's law. What happens is that they're kind of accidentally deciding on our system design and our service design, right? And unintentionally. So it's important to be aware of this. Another important aspect when we're thinking about teams and how can they, deliver faster, be more autonomous. And we realize more and more the importance of autonomous team as we work remotely, as we see that it becomes more difficult to actually have kind of coordination between multiple teams when there's very different, we're not in the same office, people are working at different times, juggling with their private lives and so on. And so we should think about cognitive load as a way of addressing how much can teams do and in an autonomous way. So Daniel North, which is a very popular speaker, his talks are very funny as well and insightful. He talks about people having, think about software that fits in your head as, it's not too big, it's not too small, it fits my capacity to understand it, to reason about the software. And we just take this to the team level because we're focusing on teams as units of delivery. Then we're thinking about software that fits in our heads as a team. And there are actually some key metrics for people are familiar with the book Accelerate, also from IT Revolution, the same publisher. This book, I highly recommend it every time because it's based on research around many organizations providing data. And they found these 4 key metrics correlate strongly with high-performing teams or elite performing teams, as they call it. And if you think about it, if the cognitive load, if kind of this idea that there's too much on the plate for the teams to be able to actually do their work effectively, then all these metrics are going to be negatively affected probably. The lead time to get a change into our customers' hands is going to take longer because I don't have a good understanding of the software we're responsible for as a team. I'm going to deploy less frequently. It's going to take longer to restore service from incidents because I don't have as clear understanding of what different parts of the software are doing and why do we have this issue, and so on. So I think the idea of cognitive load, I would expect, kind of rings a bell. It's kind of, you've probably are associating that with situations you've seen. And there's an actual definition from John Sweller, who is a psychologist. So this is back in 1988. And he's saying that this is the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. And perhaps more interestingly is that we can break this down into different parts. So obviously depends on your point of view. If we're taking the point of view here of a software delivery team, then we can categorize cognitive load in 3 different aspects. One is intrinsic cognitive load. So if we're developing, let's say, a Java application and we don't know how to define classes, we don't know how to, the syntax of the language, then this is going to take space in our working memory, right? We have to Google it, or we have to try to remember, or, try to compile and see what are the errors and so on. So it's going to take space in our working memory, which is limited. extraneous cognitive load could be, for example, if I need to deploy an application, or if I need to test and I don't know how to do that, I don't remember, it's again going to take space in our working memory. So I need to find out, or how do I access test environment, or whatever it might be that I need to do. And germane cognitive load is everything that's related to the actual business problem we're trying to solve, or solution we're trying to find. So everything that relates to the actual domain that we're trying to deliver value for. So if I'm working in a banking application, then I probably need to know how bank transfers work, right? And many other things. So that's the germane part of the cognitive load. So you can kind of generalize, intrinsic cognitive load has to do with skills that we need to do our work. If we don't have them, it's going to increase cognitive load. Extraneous is around mechanisms, if you like, things that need to happen to deliver the value, but are not directly related to the problem domain. And finally, germane, everything that's focused on the business domain. And so in general, what we want to do is this, right? We want to minimize intrinsic extraneous cognitive load, so we have more space for germane cognitive load. So we spend most of our working memory, we use it to think about the problem, the business solution we're trying to achieve. And so again, these three aspects of cognitive load apply to any domain. So John Sweller was talking about this, was totally unrelated to IT. And I gave you some examples from software delivery point of view, but I think you can think about how does this apply specifically to PMO point of view? What are the things that are intrinsic that essentially, if you don't have the skills, then you're gonna need more cognitive, you're gonna spend more cognitive capacity? What are the things that perhaps are extraneous in the sense we need to do them, but actually if we had a way not to have to think about it, can we automate some controls, some checklists? Can we not do some work that actually is perhaps just a repetition that it's kind of superfluous? Anything. Obviously I'm not expert, so I think you probably can come up with different examples so that you focus on the germane part of your work, which is really what's directly related to the value that your organization is providing to customers. So I think this idea of trying to achieve this more space for germane cognitive load still applies. But going back to a software delivery team point of view, what we want to do then is, what we need to do is limit the size of software services or products to the cognitive load that the team can handle, right? So that we want them to be autonomous, but then the size of their responsibility, whether it's actually developing software or just domains of responsibility, if they're not actually teams delivering software, but they might be operational teams or teams that have some responsibilities, that matches their cognitive capacity. What we don't want to have is kind of unbounded cognitive load. So one example of this is, I mentioned ops teams. If they're responsible for the runtime of our services and we just keep delivering more and more services or evolutions of those, their cognitive load is just growing, in an unbounded way. That we're not thinking about how much can they actually handle. We're just assuming they're the ops team, so they are able to take on the runtime and responsibility to monitor and have oversight over all these services. And actually, that's what then leads the organization to slower flow, slower capacity to respond to problems. I like this example from Rob Meany. He had this tweet where he's saying, well, what is the engineering experience around building, testing, deploying, supporting your software or your service? So I think this is a good way to think about cognitive load in the context of software delivery. And we actually took this as kind of a inspiration to an example we created for assessing cognitive load on teams. So it's not about getting an actual number, or it's definitely not about comparing different teams, but for each team to kind of be able to transmit what are the issues that they find around the software they're responsible for. So this is just an example that organizations can look and start with and expand on. What is the experience of building? What are some of the problems that you find often? What problems do you have testing? and so on. So you can look at this form. I'm gonna, at the end, I have some resources linked, so don't worry about that. You'll find that. So we have some repositories on GitHub with some techniques and some templates. Essentially, what I want to talk about and that you get out of this is that we should be concerned with cognitive load on teams, and we should have some way to assess that, to kind of try to address when teams are overloaded and they're not able to perform well because of that. Another aspect that we often overlook is that yes, we can have autonomous team, cross-functional teams, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're aligned with the right value streams and for our organization. So perhaps many of you talk about product teams. I don't know, there are many names: cross-functional teams, product teams, feature teams in some cases. But whenever you have a team that has end-to-end responsibility for the life cycle of the service they're responsible for, so they're able to take an idea, get it in customers' hands, and then take the feedback by being responsible for the runtime and for monitoring, and from taking data from the running service and feed that into the next iteration of the product or service. This is the kind of team I'm talking about. In the book, we call them stream-aligned teams, because actually it's not always about a product. What you really want is teams aligned to a stream of work that is a regular cadence and where they can have end-to-end ownership. So it might be a product, it might be user persona or user journey, where you say we have very different user personas, so we need to align the teams with those. Can be different things, can even be compliance for highly regulated industries. So we talk about different streams of work and then aligning the teams to those. And this is obviously very related to alignment with the business value streams. What are the things and the services and products that provide value to customers and therefore to the organization? Because going back to that example, think about Conway's law again, and this kind of structure. If we have something like this, what tends to happen is that when you need to deliver a feature, you're going to need to have all these teams involved, or many of these teams involved, to deliver a single feature. So you need the teams that will work on front and back end, but also you need to make changes, for any non-trivial feature to the databases, and then you need to involve ops team to monitor and do the handover to them. And so this is, again, not ideal if we want fast flow, but even when we have this kind of structure, if the alignment with the business streams is not there, what is going to happen? It might happen that we have different services, but they're not aligned to streams of work. Actually, they're based on kind of more of a technical decision around, which parts of the system need to be split off. But when you have a feature or a user journey, and turns out that actually we need to change all these different services to provide this feature, this is what happens again. So we're in the same kind of problematic scenario as before. So it's first acknowledging Conway's law, and second, aligning the teams with the actual streams of work that have their own cadence, their own needs, and that the teams can have more end-to-end ownership. Obviously, this will vary depending on organization, but what we want to aim for is as much end-to-end ownership per team as possible, but they need that alignment with the business. Because otherwise we might have very nice microservices or whatever is the latest technical wonder, but if they're not aligned with streams, we still get into this kind of problem where we need a lot of coordination, we need a lot of dependencies to actually get a single feature out the door. And when we talk about team ownership, that kind of end-to-end ownership, we're not just talking about understanding, being able to make changes to the software and put it in production, but also, being able to test, being able to support and operate this software, this service in an effective way. So each team needs to have this kind of ownership, meaning this kind of capabilities. So what we want is each service to be fully owned by a team with sufficient cognitive capacity to build, operate, and test and support this. This is the way we can get to fast flow, and also to increase and to improve on those 4 key metrics I mentioned before. So essentially we're saying we want teams to have more autonomy to be able to do things on their own, but also they need competences, kind of the basic building blocks to have that autonomy is to have the competences required. And so this is sometimes a struggle to how do we balance this? We can't just say, well, this team, you're now autonomous, just do everything that you need to do. Because if they don't have the competences, they're probably going to take shortcuts and this is going to come and bite you later on. And so how do we do that? And that's kind of one of the key things that we addressed in the book, Team Topologies. So effectively, a very short version, given the time I have today, is that those product teams or streamlined teams, they need a family of other teams to support them. So it's not realistic, it's not pragmatic to think, well, we're just going to have autonomous teams, product teams. That's it's just too much for any software delivery team to take on. And so we have these other fundamental topologies that exist to help them. So very quickly, because I won't go into details, but we can have enabling teams that are usually a team of experts around some domain. That could be, for example, continuous delivery or test automation or something more specific, or security, for example. So these teams are there not to do the work, but to help the streamlined teams gain the knowledge that they're lacking, gain the capabilities to understand, not become experts themselves, but have sufficient understanding of practices, tools, and in this domain so that they can be more autonomous. We have complicated subsystem teams, which are kind of a last resort, if you like. There are some situations, so it's not about just having a team specialized in some technology. It's more than that. It's when you need kind of PhD level understanding, for example, for face recognition systems, real-time financial trading, complicated mathematical algorithms, where you actually, to understand this and thinking back to cognitive capacity, to understand this and being able to make changes effectively with a two-pizza team, then they need to be dedicated to this complicated subsystem. But again, that should be an exception. I would say 95% of organizations should not need complicated subsystem teams. And finally, platform teams, where we can provide self-service capabilities around a range of areas that most teams will need, including things like testing, monitoring, deployments, providing them the tools and the capacities, either it's through APIs or libraries or whatever helps them do their work more effectively and not have to think about how do I set up my deployment pipeline, how do I set up monitoring to tooling, and how do I do that? So those are all things that the platform can help abstract from the streamlined teams. So that they have less to focus in terms of extraneous cognitive load, and they're free to, we free their capacity to focus on the business aspects. And really the success of all these three supporting teams is the success of streamlined teams. So if you want one metric or one high level objective is this. So that's how we should think about all these supporting teams. Their purpose is reduce cognitive load on streamlined teams and not on other teams in general. We also talk about interaction modes, because it's not just about having the types of teams, but also how do they interact. And so if we make that clear, so in the book we say that we think there are only three fundamental interaction modes, which are common sense, if you like: collaboration, two teams working together to achieve some purpose. So and they specify for how long they expect to collaborate. Acts as a service, where one team provides a service to another in a kind of self-service manner. And facilitating, where one team helps another kind of upskill, gain the competences that they're lacking. And when you have the four fundamental topologies and the three interaction modes, you can start to have kind of an organizational landscape, if you like. So this could be an example, a snapshot in time of, obviously a part of organization. We're only looking at 5 teams here, where, this is what's going on now. There's some collaboration with a complicated subsystem team, perhaps on a new version of a face recognition system. There's an enabling team helping a stream team perhaps gain some skills around security, automation, or test automation, whatever it might be that they're kind of lagging behind. And so with this, again, it's not a model, it's a snapshot, but you can reason about this and understand where you think you're going to need to go in the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be, to address the current gaps and whatever is coming ahead, whether that's changes in what the market is asking, and now we need to focus on artificial intelligence, for example. We don't have any skills. What are we going to do about that? Maybe we need an enabling team around that. Or the technology is changing and we decided we need to adopt Kubernetes, for example. So how are we going to provide platform services to make life easier for streamline teams to adopt this technology that is not, it's very powerful, but it's not easy to understand and adopt. So giving us kind of the tools to think about the organization landscape and how it needs to evolve. I'm getting to the end, so very quickly, Team API, it's I included because it's a very powerful and simple technique, really. It's kind of similar to team working agreements, if you've heard of that. Essentially, it's for each team, and this is a good starting point for each team to make it more explicit and clear to other teams. How do they like to work? And what code or whatever artifacts or responsibilities they have as a team, how, if they are responsible for code, how do they version, test, deploy, etc. How do they like to work? What are the principles and practices they follow? Crucially, what are they working on? What's the roadmap or whatever terminology used for, what's the work coming after, coming in the near future? And the last point is also very important. How do we prefer to communicate? How do we make that easy to have those good interactions between teams by clarifying also, simple things, but sometimes you would be surprised or perhaps not surprised how often it's hard to know, who should I ask for help around this issue, and how should I Slack them or should I call them, or obviously now face-to-face is hard. But if we're in the same office, is that how they like to be, how they like to interact or not? So making this clear can be very effective. And so each team can start with this, regardless of if you're applying the topologies or not, just to clarify the interactions with other teams. And effectively, each team would need to continuously advertise and promote their API so that it makes it easier for them, because they will get the right kind of interactions and they will, get less questions about things that they have made clear. So this actually reduces cognitive load around communications themselves between teams, and for other teams to, find out, how should I interact with this team. So again, there's a repository on GitHub where we have a simple template, just ideas to get started, kind of things that you might have there around, a team API, what kind of information might be in there. Again, would be interesting to see how well this applies to your work in your teams as PMO or other roles. Obviously, some things will change, but we think this is a useful tool across many domains. Quickly, if you want to get started with this, you can think about making cognitive load more explicit, assess the cognitive load on teams. How well can each team understand, if they're working on software, the systems or services they own and develop? If it's something else, the responsibility of the team, how well do they understand that? How often do they have problems because they don't have enough capacity available to understand enough of what they need to do? So I mentioned the tweet, or you can look at the cognitive load assessment. Are there some things that we can push in the platform if all the teams are having to create their own deployment pipelines or deployment approach? Can we move that to a platform service that it's easy to use? Are they lacking some capabilities, some competences that we can help provide, whether it's an enabling team or more traditional training or communities of practice, whatever works for you? Second, are there any misaligned work streams where we have teams working, yes, on pieces of software services, but if that's not a real work stream, because the work streams are actually along user personas or other kind of aspects that are the true independent work streams, then can we address that? So kind of a trigger is if we frequently need 3-4 more teams to tackle a single change, a single user journey or a single feature, then it's probably a sign that we have misaligned work streams. Another example around regulations, if development teams in a highly regulated industry, for example, healthcare or something like that, or banking or financial organizations, are they expected to just know the regulations and what applies to their services? How can we help them? And perhaps does it make sense to have a work stream just around compliance or not? If we're seeing that often kind of the focus is just on reducing cost at all costs, sorry for the repetition there, but if that's kind of the holy grail and we're not looking at how can we move faster so that we can deliver value faster and actually increase our bottom line, even if it might cost a bit more, then we probably are going to have misaligned work streams as well, where we're just focusing on utilization, we're focusing on local optimization and not kind of alignment with the business value streams. And finally, any kind of large Conway mismatches where you see the team structures are very different from the system design. So you probably need to have software architects involved. Essentially, another way to put it is you need co-design of the organization and the systems and services. So you need people who decide about org design, like HR or managers, working together with system architects that perhaps decide on the technical side. So how can we reduce these mismatches and reduce the friction that it probably is happening today to deliver services? So I mentioned the book, workbook for free. That will be freely available as a PDF specifically for remote teams, taking aspects of Team Topologies and how do these relate to distributed teams and remote teams. That should come out in June. There's all our trainings now online, remote friendly assessments as well. I wanted to mention this. So there's a self-paced course that we did together with the Project Management Institute. If you want to look at that, there's a 20% discount code for now. Which is how Team Topologies, kind of the ideas of Team Topologies and how that applies to project management and product management as well. So that's about a half-day course that you can have a look as well at your own pace. Some resources, so I'll share the slides and I'll send the slides to John if you like to share as well.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll share those out with everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you not ringing the bell, sorry, it took a bit longer than 20 minutes.
Awesome. No, that was great. Thank you very much, Manuel. There's a load of information there, quite a lot of stuff to take in for everyone. So we talked about cognitive capacity for our teams and how we help them focus on the right things. We used some germane there, but that was basically say that the stuff that's relevant to what we're delivering. How can we keep the right things in the head rather than flooding our teams? We need to consider, as well as that, the capability of our teams and nurture them. So it isn't enough just to declare a team self-organizing. We tend to do a lot with agile teams. You're self-organizing now, or let them declare themselves self-organizing and think they can go off and do their own thing. We need to have that nurture around them and build that capability along with it. It was an interesting view about dependencies for me. So if I look at a traditional view of dependency management for the PMO, what we're talking about here is I wonder if there's something there about looking at cross-team dependencies through the lens of the interaction models that we saw there and asking what those look like. Is this collaborative? Is this one team offering as a service function to another facilitation? And then this idea of what we're calling a sort of contract or a team API. I quite like. I think Team API would appeal to sort of development teams, and that they should be familiar with defining an API and what that looks like, how it works, defining all of those things as essentially their kind of human interface, that human API, how we contract, how we engage, what that looks like, everything from how we engage. Is it best to talk to us on Slack or Teams or email, and making it very, very clear what our repositories are, how we control them, how we release things, all of that as well. And the more visible you can make those things, as I suspect for a lot of PMOs that look at the how teams interact. Simon Harris said there was a lot of stuff going on in comments, but Simon Harris made the point earlier on that half of the solution is in the description of the problem. And if we get teams to build those team APIs, you go part of the way to breaking down some of those barriers between them and improving things. And lastly, I think there's a role there for the PMO to be watching out for those kind of anti-patterns or those misalignment mismatches that we see. And if we can go some way to solving those, we're kind of moving ourselves a little bit further forward in moving ourselves away from our non-Newtonian fluids and more to this idea of having this hot oil off a Teflon frying pan. So anyway, there's been a lot of talking at you. There's a lot of information there that we've presented, shared. I think it's time to hear from other people. Do you think, Lindsay?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Has anybody else got any questions that they want to bring up, or just comments, or anything that you've listened to where you want to put to Manuel, or just to respond to John?
Manuel, it's Lawrence here from Ticketmaster. I just want to say I read your book in depth over the December break, actually, and I absolutely loved it. And one thing I wanted to also just share and call out was, when you've got the different team types and the different team interactions, what I love about the book is that you created you provided the building blocks, not necessarily a framework. So as the organization changes, you can take the team types and interactions and dynamically reshape them to what's unfolding in the business, which is just absolutely brilliant.
Definitely.
So very inspiring. And, sometimes the organization doesn't have the appetite or isn't capable of making enormous transformations or changes overnight. But I think the work that you guys have put out there is, you could take just cognitive load, or you could take just working memory. And, if you brought that to the team, that in itself can transform how the team respond and how they cope and how they, manage with what's around them. So just brilliant. I love it. It's completely free, and your work has got so much potential. It's just superb.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. It's definitely, we wanted to not to propose a model, because there's no kind of end state for organizations. You need to continuously evolve. So it's exactly what he said, just providing some building blocks. And it's interesting because, for example, in our training, we get people with very different roles, from project management to agile coaches to CTOs and head of engineering. Because, like you said, you can start from different point of views, and that has been very rewarding to see. Some people, if their scope is within a team, they might take the team API, or let's think about cognitive load. What can we do? So there are different kind of entry points to the work.
Yeah, amazing, brilliant, really good. And thank you, John and Lindsay. It's just superb. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Anything else from anyone? I saw there were quite a few. So I know Simon was quite active in the channel. There was a question there was a question in the channel there at the end from, well, I've lost now. There's one in the end asking about the API from Shane. When we say API, I assume referring to a programming language. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me answer. I wanted to mention that. So we've had some criticism of calling it API, and I totally understand why. So API means application programming interface. So if you're looking at it from software delivery point of view, and Conway's law, actually the team APIs should be kind of similar in a way to the actual service software APIs, because we're trying to mirror the system with the team structures. But obviously we wanted just to we made that analogy, but we think this applies broadly. So it's really team interface is what we wanted to come out. But obviously, depending on your context, team API might be too geeky, if you like, and that's not what we intended.
So yeah, it's kind of, yeah, I get it. That makes a lot of sense, and I think Hillary's responded as well that it's essentially a contract in software terms. It's a contract between systems based on an overarching data model, and what we're talking about here is not just having that between the technology, but between the people and the teams as well. So bringing that up to the team level, I guess, really. Any other thoughts from the channel, or anybody else want to unmute and ask a question while we've got Manuel here? Oh, you're really quiet this week.
Or if you have some insight on how cognitive load applies to your team, any examples of where you've seen, well, this looks like this was too much cognitive load, and therefore we're not able to effectively address this work that we had to do. Any interesting examples?
Actually, Manuel, if it's okay, I've got a question. It's
Sure.
Colin, also from Ticketmaster.
Ticketmaster.
Yeah. Sorry, that's why I waited, to be honest with you. But so I was curious. Like, obviously, I know you've been doing loads of workshops and stuff. I was curious if you've seen any patterns of teams maybe struggling to work out how to create those new, like, team boundaries and new APIs where they've had to really kind of reorganize. I know we've had a couple of attempts at doing it in different ways at our place, and occasionally there's been, particularly where there's a limited number of people with a specialist expertise and we're coupled to maybe an expensive piece of software that is going to take time to get off of. That's definitely proved a challenge for us, and we've had to reverse some of those decisions. We're not necessarily happy about it, but just from a practical point of view, they're so complex, they require so much domain knowledge. It's meant we've had to, kind of not necessarily follow through. And I don't know if you've seen similar patterns to
that. Yes, I mean, first of all, it's definitely, you need to evolve over time. So we've seen anti-patterns where people are too excited about the topologies, and they want to kind of map everything, all the teams they have today into the topologies. And that does not necessarily work either from one day to another. So for example, with platform teams, actually the difficult part is, perhaps what you're implicitly alluding is that if you have people that are used to work in certain ways, that they used to be the technical experts, it might be quite difficult for them to understand, well, now we need to, if we're in a platform team, we need to collaborate with our internal customers, which are the other teams. So that's a very different mindset. We need to think about product management. How do we evolve the platform? It's not about going off and for 3 months or 6 months and working on all these great services technically, but when we come back, we realize that's not what the teams need, or they're still too complicated for the teams to use effectively. So the interactions are really key. And that's where I see anti-patterns, that you need to make time and expect that it's going to take time for people to become familiar with these interactions, collaboration, acts as a service, and facilitating. Because especially in the technical domain, we've often have not had those, that clarity and that kind of customer and product focus. So for platform teams, that is very common, where organizations have, okay, we agree, we want platform, we want self-service capabilities, but then they go too fast and they want to, okay, I want to make all these services available to the teams, and then the teams struggle to understand how to use it, and that comes back, on the platform team having to, they have too much request for support, for help, because they have not established the interaction modes. The interaction modes actually work as sensors, as kind of triggers to understand, well, we are expected to collaborate for this period of time, and it took much longer, or we didn't achieve the purpose that we had set up. Why is that? And using that as kind of sensing when we need to actually change some things still. So there are some other triggers for when we need to evolve the organization structures, but the interaction modes are very important as well to use as this sensing mechanism.
Brilliant. Thanks, Manuel. There's a lot to think about for everyone there. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure loads of people will look at the slides again after this, take some more time to digest it and look at the stuff online. We're coming